For 10 years she endured his mockery, his blatant affairs, and the cruel whispered jokes about her weight. In the courtroom she sat perfectly still as he tried to leave her with nothing. He thought she was just a quiet, helpless woman. He didn't realize she was the architect of his absolute downfall. The air inside courtroom 302 of the Manhattan Family Court was stifling, heavy with the scent of polished mahogany and the suffocating tension of a marriage ending in utter ruin. Judge Martin Henderson sat behind the high bench, a man whose 30 years in family law had left him with a perpetual scowl and very little patience for theatrics. Yet theatrics were precisely what Richard Sterling was paying his attorney $5,000 an hour to produce. Richard sat at the petitioner's table, looking every inch the aggrieved, hard-working titan of industry. He wore a charcoal bespoke Tom Ford suit that draped perfectly over his lean, athletic frame of physique he maintained with a religious devotion to his personal trainer and morning squash games. His silver fox hair was impeccably styled, and his posture radiated the casual arrogance of a man who owned entire city blocks. Beside him, his high-powered bulldog of a lawyer, Conrad Hayes, was in the middle of a blistering opening statement, pacing the floor like a predator. At the respondents' table sat Beatrice Sterling. To look at her, one might mistakenly believe Conrad's vicious narrative. Beatrice was a heavy woman carrying the physical weight of a severe thyroid condition and a decade of profound emotional neglect. Her navy blue dress was neat, expensive, but deliberately understated, designed to blend in rather than stand out. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple, unyielding bun. She wore no makeup, no jewelry aside from the plain gold wedding band she had not yet been legally ordered to remove. "Your Honor," Conrad's voice boomed, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "We are here today to dissolve a partnership that has, for the last 7 years, been entirely unilateral. My client, Richard Sterling, built Sterling Capital Management from a modest 2-room office into a regional powerhouse through relentless dedication, 70-hour work weeks, and unparalleled financial acumen. And what we must ask was his spouse doing during this decade of wealth creation?" Conrad paused, turning a disdainful eye toward Beatrice. She did not blink. She did not look away. She simply stared at a fixed point on the oak table in front of her. "Mrs. Sterling," Conrad continued, letting the title sound like an insult, "has not held a job since 2014. She has contributed nothing to the household economy. She has preferred to spend her days indulging in a lethargic lifestyle, shielded by the immense financial umbrella my client provided. She is now demanding half of an empire she couldn't even begin to understand, let alone manage. Furthermore, as the court documents will show, Sterling Capital is currently navigating a brutal market downturn. The liquidity simply isn't there to support Mrs. Mess's." Sterling's continued. "Excesses." Richard touched his eyes with a pristine white handkerchief, playing the exhausted martyr to perfection. He had spent the last 5 years of their marriage calling her names that still bruised her soul: the anchor, the liability, the couch whale. He had paraded his mistresses through the city's most exclusive restaurants, confident that Beatrice was too sluggish, too intimidated, and too financially dependent to ever do anything about it. His current favorite, a 26-year-old gallery curator named Chloe Davenport, was likely waiting in the penthouse Richard claimed he was renting from a friend due to his supposed financial hardships. Beside Beatrice sat Evelyn Pierce. Evelyn was a sharp, bird-like woman in a gray suit, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Unlike Conrad, Evelyn had not paced. She had not raised her voice. She had simply sat there writing meticulously on a legal pad with a silver fountain pen. Evelyn had specifically instructed Beatrice to remain absolutely silent, to show no emotion, to let Richard and Conrad fill the room with their own hubris. "They are digging their own graves, Bear," Evelyn had whispered in the hallway before they entered. "Let them dig deep. We'll provide the dirt." Judge Henderson peered over his glasses at Beatrice, perhaps expecting an outburst, a tearful objection, or at least a flush of humiliation. But Beatrice's face was carved from stone. The truth was, she wasn't feeling humiliated. She was feeling the icy, terrifying calm of a hunter waiting for the trap to snap shut. Conrad wrapped up his opening statement with a flourish, demanding the court award Beatrice a meager severance of $3,000 a month for a maximum of 2 years, and forcing her to vacate the upstate New York property immediately. It was an insulting, aggressive offer meant to starve her into submission. "Does the respondent have an opening statement?" Judge Henderson asked, his tone softening just a fraction, perhaps out of pity. Evelyn stood up slowly. "We waive our opening statement, Your Honor. We are eager to proceed directly to the petitioner's testimony." A murmur rippled through the small gallery. Waiving an opening statement in a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar divorce was highly unusual. Conrad smirked, leaning over to whisper something in Richard's ear. Richard chuckled softly, glancing at his wife with a look of supreme victory. He thought she had given up. He thought Evelyn had looked at his heavily doctored financial disclosures and realized they had no case. "Very well," Judge Henderson said, looking skeptical. "Mr. Hayes, call your first witness." "We call Richard Sterling to the stand," Conrad announced triumphantly. As Richard walked to the witness box, Beatrice finally lifted her head, her eyes locked onto his. For a fraction of a second, Richard's confident stride faltered. There was no pain in her eyes. There was no fear. There was only a cold, clinical observation, like a scientist watching a lab rat wander into a maze from which it would never return. Richard took the oath with the solemn dignity of a statesman, placing his hand over his heart. He settled into the witness chair, adjusting his cuffs, exuding an aura of weary transparency. Under Conrad's gentle, guiding, direct examination, Richard painted a masterpiece of corporate tragedy. He spoke of the brutal commercial real estate market, soaring interest rates, and devastating supply chain failures that had supposedly brought Sterling Capital to its knees. "It breaks my heart, Your Honor," Richard said, his voice thick with practiced emotion. "I built this company to provide for my family. But the reality is, after paying off our senior creditors, the equity is essentially zero. We are operating on thin margins, and I'm personally guaranteeing lines of credit just to make payroll for my employees. The cash simply doesn't exist." Conrad pulled out a thick binder. "Let the record reflect I am submitting Exhibit A, the audited financial statements for Sterling Capital Management for the last 3 fiscal years. As the court can see, Mr. Sterling's personal draw has been reduced to a mere $200,000 annually, a fraction of his former income. And your personal assets, Mr. Sterling?" Conrad asked sympathetically. "Liquidated to keep the business afloat," Richard lied smoothly. "The ski chalet in Aspen was sold at a loss. The yacht was repossessed by the bank. I live in a modest apartment loaned to me by a business associate. I want to be fair to Beatrice, I truly do. But I cannot give her money that I do not have. Thank you, Mr. Sterling." "No further questions," Conrad said, returning to his seat with a self-satisfied nod. "Cross-examination, Miss Pierce?" Judge Henderson prompted. Evelyn Pierce stood up. She did not bring a binder, she did not bring a legal pad. She walked slowly toward the podium, holding a single manila folder. The silence in the courtroom grew tight, stretching like a rubber band about to snap. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling," Evelyn said, her voice mild, almost polite. "Good morning," Richard replied, offering a patronizing smile. "You testified a moment ago that you liquidated your personal assets, including a yacht, the Sea Sovereign, to keep your business afloat. Is that correct?" "Yes." "A tragic necessity," Richard sighed. "And who held the mortgage on that yacht, Mr. Sterling?" Richard frowned slightly, waving a hand. "A marine financing firm. First Atlantic Bank, I believe." Evelyn opened her folder. She pulled out a single sheet of paper and handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge, and then a copy to Conrad. "Your Honor, I'm introducing Respondent's Exhibit 1. It is a wire transfer receipt from a bank in Geneva, Switzerland." Conrad shot to his feet. "Objection. We haven't seen this in discovery." "Not all. You wouldn't have, Counselor," Evelyn replied smoothly. because your client explicitly swore under penalty of perjury during discovery that he held no foreign accounts. I am impeaching his current testimony using a document we legally obtained via a private forensic audit." "Overruled," Judge Henderson growled, staring intently at the paper. "Proceed, Miss Pierce." "Mr. Sterling," Evelyn continued, her eyes locking onto Richard, "this document shows that the Sea Sovereign was not repossessed. It was sold for $4.2 million, but the money did not go to First Atlantic Bank. It went to a holding company called Yellow Jacket LLC, based in the Cayman Islands. Are you familiar with Yellow Jacket LLC?" Richard's face lost a fraction of its color. "I do not recall offhand. I deal with many corporate entities." Beatrice sat perfectly still. Yellow Jacket. It was the name he used to call her when she wore her favorite summer dress. He had laughed, telling his friend she looked like a bloated bumblebee. He thought he was so clever, hiding his stolen millions behind an inside joke meant to degrade her. "Let me refresh your memory," Evelyn said, pulling out a second document. "This is the incorporation charter for Yellow Jacket LLC. The sole managing director is listed as one Richard Thomas Sterling. Is that your signature at the bottom, Mr. Sterling?" Conrad snatched the paper from the bailiff, his eyes darting frantically over the ink. "Your Honor, my client needs a moment to review this." "No, that what bum. Oh, bam. "He can review it while he answers the question," Judge Henderson snapped. "Is that your signature, Mr. Sterling?" "It appears to be. But that company was a defunct entity intended for a real estate venture that never materialized. A defunct entity that somehow received $4.2 million from the sale of your yacht." Evelyn interrupted, her voice finally sharpening, cracking like a whip across the room. "Let's move on to the commercial real estate market you claim is so brutal. You testified Sterling Capital's equity is zero. Are you familiar with an entity named Apex Horizon Holdings?" Richard gripped the arms of the witness chair. The knuckles of his manicured hands turned white. "It rings a bell." "It should," Evelyn said, walking closer to him, "because according to these tax filings, Respondents Exhibit 3, Your Honor, Apex Horizon Holdings purchased 3 prime commercial towers in downtown Chicago last year. Paid in cash, $58 million. "That has nothing to do with me," Richard stammered, a thin sheen of sweat breaking out on his forehead. "That's a private equity group." Evelyn turned to look at Beatrice. For the first time all morning, Beatrice allowed a small, terrible smile to touch the corners of her mouth. "It is a private equity group," Evelyn agreed. "And who is the primary shareholder of Apex Horizon?" "I don't know," Richard spat, his composure fracturing. "I am not responsible for every firm in the country." Evelyn reached into her folder and pulled out a thick, bound dossier. She didn't hand it to the bailiff immediately. She held it up so Richard could see the embossed seal on the cover. "You don't know?" Evelyn asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Because according to the encrypted internal ledgers from your own private server, the server you thought was wiped clean in December, the primary shareholder of Apex Horizon Holdings is you, Mr. Sterling. And the person who painstakingly reconstructed those deleted ledgers line by line over the course of 3 years from her lethargic position on the couch." Evelyn finally turned and pointed directly at the silent, imposing figure of the wife Richard had dismissed. Was Beatrice Sterling. The courtroom erupted into absolute chaos. Conrad Hayes was on his feet, shouting objections that were completely drowned out by the roar of the gallery. Richard sat paralyzed in the witness box, staring at his wife as if she had just transformed into a monster. Beatrice simply folded her hands on the table, her smile vanishing, replaced by a gaze of absolute, unyielding iron. She had stayed silent, but now her paperwork was doing the screaming. The deafening crack of Judge Martin Henderson's gavel finally cut through the uproar, striking the wooden block with enough force to echo like a gunshot. "Order!" the judge bellowed, his face flushed with a furious crimson. "I will clear this courtroom if I hear another sound from that gallery." Mr. Hayes, control your client or I will hold him in contempt. Oh, bap, bun. It's bud. Fun. So, Comrade Hayes looked as though he had just been struck by lightning. The slick, high-powered attorney, who had strutted into the room half an hour earlier radiating invincibility, was now desperately leafing through the dossier Evelyn Pierce had casually dropped on his table. His hands were visibly shaking. He knew exactly what this meant. Richard Sterling had not only lied to the court, but he had also lied to his own legal counsel, effectively turning Conrad into an unwitting accomplice to massive financial fraud and perjury. "Your Honor," Conrad stammered, his booming voice reduced to a dry rasp. "The defense respectfully requests a 48-hour recess to review these unverified documents." "Request denied," Judge Henderson snapped, his eyes fixed on Richard with absolute disgust. "Your client is under oath, Mr. Hayes, and he is currently in the middle of a very revealing cross-examination. Miss Pierce, you may proceed." Evelyn adjusted her glasses, the picture of serene professionalism. "Thank you, Your Honor." She turned her attention back to the witness box, where Richard sat practically hyperventilating, his custom Tom Ford suit suddenly looking 2 sizes too big. "Mr. Sterling," Evelyn began, her tone conversational but laced with lethal intent, "let's discuss how my client, whom you described in your sworn affidavit as computationally illiterate and profoundly lazy, managed to dismantle your labyrinth of offshore shell companies. Dacts." Richard swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the exit doors. He looked like a cornered animal. "This is a violation of privacy. Those servers were located in my private home office. She had no right to a home office located in the marital residence, Mr. Sterling," Evelyn corrected sharply. "A residence my client had every legal right to occupy and navigate. What you fail to remember in your arrogant dismissal of your wife is that before she developed a severe thyroid condition and before you demanded she quit her job to manage your social calendar, Beatrice Sterling graduated summa cum laude from the Wharton School with a master's degree in forensic accounting." A gasp rippled through the gallery. Richard squeezed his eyes shut. He had spent the last 8 years treating her like an embarrassing piece of furniture, actively suppressing the memory of the sharp, vibrant woman he had married before her illness altered her physical appearance. He thought her weight had made her stupid. He thought her silence meant she was broken. "Let the record reflect," Evelyn continued, pacing slowly in front of the witness stand, "that while Mr. Sterling was working late at his supposed friend's penthouse, Beatrice was working the night shift. For 3 years, every time you left the house to entertain your various mistresses, Beatrice sat at your mahogany desk. She didn't need to hack your firewall, Richard. You were arrogant enough to leave your master passwords written in a leather notebook in your safe, a safe you never bothered to change the combination for because you assumed she was too lethargic to walk up the stairs. Beatrice remained perfectly still, though her chest rose and fell with a deep, steady rhythm. She remembered those long, agonizing nights, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off her tear-stained cheeks, the absolute soul-crushing devastation of finding the first hidden account, not because she was looking for money, but because she had been looking for a reason why he had stopped loving her. She found her answer in the ledgers. He hadn't just stopped loving her. He had actively plotted to starve her out. "Let's move to Respondent's Exhibit 4, Evelyn said, handing another document to the bailiff. "This is a deed of transfer for a luxury ski chalet in Aspen. The property you testified was sold at a loss to keep Sterling Capital afloat. It was a difficult market," Richard Wheatley mumbled, wiping his forehead with his handkerchief. "It wasn't sold, was it, Mr. Sterling?" Evelyn's voice rang out. "It was transferred for the sum of $1 to a blind trust registered in Delaware, and the sole beneficiary of that blind trust is a 26-year-old gallery curator named Chloe Davenport, your current girlfriend." Conrad Hayes dropped his pen. It clattered loudly against the oak table. He buried his face in his hands, massaging his temples. "Is that correct, Mr. Sterling?" the judge prompted, leaning over the bench, his voice dangerously low. "Did you perjure yourself regarding the Aspen property to hide assets and enrich your mistress?" She was a consultant," Richard blurted out, panic entirely overriding his common sense. "Chloe provided vital aesthetic consulting for Sterling Capital's corporate rebranding. The chalet was part of her compensation package." Judge Henderson let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Aesthetic consulting for an investment firm? To the tune of a $6 million property. Mr. Sterling, I have presided over this court for 30 years, and that is without a doubt the most insulting lie I have ever been told." "Tool. Furthermore," Evelyn pressed on, relentless and merciless, "the ledgers Beatrice decrypted show a pattern of systemic embezzlement. You weren't just hiding marital assets from your wife, Richard. You were actively draining the capital of your own investors at Sterling Capital, funneling their money through Apex Horizon Holdings to purchase Chicago real estate entirely off the books." Richard's face drained of all color, turning an ashen, sickly gray. "You can't prove that. Those ledgers are internal projections. They aren't actualized data. They are actualized, Mr. Sterling," Evelyn said gently, "because we matched every single digital entry in your deleted server to the corresponding wire transfer receipts from Geneva, the Cayman Islands, and Cyprus. Beatrice spent 3 years following the money. She didn't just find your hidden wealth, Richard. She mapped the entire criminal enterprise." The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. Even the court reporter's fingers seemed to hesitate over the keys, paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the destruction happening on the stand. Richard Sterling, the undisputed king of regional private equity, was completely unraveling. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He looked frantically at his lawyer, but Conrad Hayes was staring straight ahead, actively distancing himself from the radioactive fallout. "Your Honor," Evelyn Pierce said, her voice cutting through the thick silence. "When we entered this courtroom this morning, opposing counsel characterized my client as a leech, a lazy, lethargic burden who contributed nothing to the marital estate and deserved nothing but $3,000 a month and an eviction notice." She walked back to her table and stood beside Beatrice, placing a supportive hand on the older woman's shoulder. "We are not asking for half of the marital estate, Your Honor," Evelyn announced. Richard's head snapped up. A glimmer of desperate, pathetic hope sparked in his eyes. Had they gone too far? Were they backing down? "We are not asking for half," Evelyn repeated, "because under the laws of equitable distribution, a spouse who actively engages in the fraudulent dissipation and criminal concealment of marital assets forfeits their right to an equal share. We are petitioning the court for 100% of the verified marital assets, including the recovered offshore accounts, the real estate portfolio held by Apex Horizon, and the immediate seizure of the Aspen Chalet." "You're out of your mind," Richard screamed, leaping up from the witness chair. "You can't take everything. I built that money. It's mine. Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Judge Henderson roared, reaching for his gavel again. "But we're not finished," Evelyn said, speaking over Richard's outburst. She reached into her manila folder and pulled out one final piece of paper. It was not a bank statement, it was a formal government receipt. "What is that?" Conrad Hayes asked, his voice trembling. "This," Evelyn said, handing it to the bailiff, "is confirmation of receipt for IRS Form 211, application for award for original information." Richard froze. "What does that mean?" he whispered. Evelyn smiled, and it was a terrifying thing to witness. "It means, Mr. Sterling, that 6 months ago, before we even filed the divorce papers, Beatrice submitted the entire decrypted contents of your offshore servers, along with your doctored tax returns, to the Internal Revenue Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission." The color completely left Richard's lips. As a registered whistleblower, Evelyn explained, looking directly at the judge, my client is legally entitled to between 15 and 30% of the total funds recovered by the federal government. Considering you have hidden upward of $80 million from the IRS, Beatrice is going to be incredibly wealthy. But more importantly, Your Honor, it means Mr. Sterling's assets are no longer just a matter of family court. Judge Henderson reviewed the IRS receipt, his eyes widening slightly. He looked up at Richard, all trace of judicial neutrality gone. Mr. Sterling, I am immediately issuing a freeze on all your personal and corporate accounts, domestic and international. Furthermore, I am forwarding the unredacted transcript of today's proceedings, along with Respondents' Exhibits 1 through 6 directly to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. You are a flight risk, sir. I highly suggest you surrender your passport to your attorney before you leave this building. Richard collapsed back into the chair, burying his face in his hands. A low, wretched sob escaped his throat. The empire he had built on deceit, the money he had stolen, the mistresses he had flaunted, all of it was gone. Incinerated in a matter of minutes by the woman he had treated as subhuman. For the first time since the hearing began, Beatrice stood up. The courtroom held its breath. She smoothed down the skirt of her navy blue dress. She didn't look triumphant. She didn't look vengeful. She simply looked free. Your Honor, Beatrice said, her voice quiet but remarkably steady. It was the first time most people in the room had heard her speak. It was a rich, melodic voice. May I address my husband? Judge Henderson nodded slowly. You may, Mrs. Sterling. Beatrice turned to look at the man she had loved, the man who had systematically tried to destroy her self-worth. Richard couldn't even meet her eyes. He stared at the floor, weeping into his expensive silk tie. For 10 years, Richard, Beatrice said softly, the silence of the room amplifying her every syllable. You told me I was heavy. You told me I was a burden. You told me that my illness made me useless to you and to the world. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over him. You were right about one thing. I am heavy. But it wasn't the fat, Richard. It was the absolute crushing weight of your lies. I carried them for you. I carried your cruelty, your infidelity, and your arrogance. Beatrice took a deep breath, standing taller, her spine perfectly straight. But I am not carrying them anymore. I am leaving them right here, in this room with you. You thought my silence was surrender. It wasn't. It was strategy. Have a wonderful life in federal prison. Beatrice turned away from him, her low heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She didn't look back as she walked down the aisle, pushed open the heavy oak doors, and stepped out into the bright, blinding sunlight of a brand new life, leaving the ruins of Richard Sterling entirely behind her. If this story of ultimate revenge and silent brilliance left you speechless, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs a reminder to never underestimate a quiet woman. Subscribe to the channel for more incredible true stories of justice served cold and toxic empires crumbling to the ground. What would you have done in Beatrice's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.